Episode 3, Crossing Over, From Wilderness to Inheritance. Today we arrive at one of the most powerful turning points in the story of God's people, a moment when history, faith, and destiny collide. For 40 years, the people of Israel wandered through the wilderness. They had been rescued from slavery, led by miracles, and fed by heaven, and guided by the presence of God Himself. Yet even with all these miracles, they were not yet living in the promise. They were free, but they were not settled. They were delivered, but they were not yet established. And that brings us to this moment in Scripture, found in the early chapters in the book of Joshua, where God's people finally stand on the edge of the land He promised generations earlier. The land of Canaan is right in front of them. But there's a problem. A river stands in the way. That river is the Jordan River. And spiritually speaking, it represents something far bigger than water. It represents transition. It represents the moment when the past must fully give way to the future. And here's the truth we must understand today. You cannot carry a wilderness mindset into a promised land inheritance. The story begins after the death of Moses, the great leader who brought Israel out of Egypt. Moses had been the voice of God to the people, the lawgiver, the miracle worker, the shepherd of a difficult nation. But Moses could not be the one to bring them into promise. God raises up a new leader, Joshua. Joshua had been watching, learning, and serving faithfully for years. He had been one of the two spies who believed God when everyone else doubted. He had seen miracles. He had walked with Moses. Now the moment had come for him to lead. God speaks to Joshua with words that still echo today. Be strong and courageous. Not once, not twice, but over and over again. Because stepping into promise requires courage. Promise is wonderful, but promise also comes with responsibility, opposition, and challenge. God was telling Joshua something profound. Leadership is not just about position, it's about obedience. Joshua's role was not to invent a new vision. His role was to walk faithfully into what God had already spoken. And when leaders walk in obedience, movement begins. Obedience unlocks movement. The people of Israel were finally ready to cross the Jordan River, but they did not cross it the way armies normally cross rivers. There were no bridges. There were no boats. Instead, God gave very specific instructions. The priests were to carry the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred symbol of God's presence, and step into the river first. Think about that for a moment. The water did not stop before they moved. The miracle happened after they stepped in. And that teaches us something powerful about the way God works. So often we want God to move first. We want Him to remove the obstacle, clear the path, and make everything easy before we take a step. But many times God says, step first, then watch what I will do. When the priest carrying the ark stepped into the Jordan River, the water stopped and piled up far upstream. Suddenly the impossible became possible. The entire nation crossed the river on dry ground. And in that moment, the wilderness generation officially became the inheritance generation. But crossing the river was not just about geography, it was about identity. For 40 years, the people had lived in survival mode. They woke up each day wondering what would happen next, where they would go, and how they would eat. In the wilderness, they were wanderers, but in Canaan, they would be builders. In the desert, they were learners, but in Canaan, they would be stewards. The land requires something new from them, and that is an important spiritual principle for every generation of believers. You don't just enter promise, you transform to carry it. God was not simply moving them to a better location. He was forming a different kind of people, the remnant mindset. Now let's talk about something deeply important for those who study the ways of God, the idea of the remnant. Throughout history, God has always preserved a group of people who believe Him even when circumstances look impossible. That mindset was present in Joshua long before this moment. Years earlier, when 12 spies first explored Canaan, 10 came back filled with fear, but Joshua and Caleb saw something different. They saw the same giants, they saw the same fortified cities, but they also saw the promise of God. Now, decades later, Joshua is leading the nation into the very land he once believed for. That is how faith works. Sometimes the people who believe first must wait the longest. But when the time comes, their faith becomes the foundation for an entire generation. The stones of remembrance. After the people crossed the river, Joshua gave another command. He told 12 men, one from each tribe, to take stones from the riverbed and build a memorial. Why? Because people forget. God knew future generations would look at those stones and ask, what do these mean? And the answer would be simple. They remind us that God made a way where there was no way. Those stones were not monuments to human strength. They were reminders of divine faithfulness. Every generation needs its own stones of remembrance, moments where we can look back and say, that was God. The spiritual meaning of crossing over. So what does this story mean for us today? It reminds us that spiritual life is full of transitions. There are seasons when we learn. There are seasons when we wait. And there are seasons when God says, now it's time to move. But movement requires trust. Movement requires courage. And movement requires obedience. The wilderness may teach us many things, but it is not meant to be our permanent home. Eventually, God calls His people to cross over, to step into new responsibilities, new callings, and new identities. And just like Joshua and Israel, we may stand in front of our own Jordan River, a challenge, a decision, a moment that demands faith. When that moment comes, the question is simple. Will we step forward, or will we remain on the edge of promise? The story of crossing into Canaan reminds us of something powerful. God keeps His promises, but those promises often require transformation in the people who receive them. The wilderness teaches dependence, but the promised land requires maturity. So today the question is not whether God has promised something. The real question is, are we ready to become the kind of people who can carry that promise? Because when faith steps forward, the waters still part and inheritance begins. Thank you, and God bless you.